Russian sabotage in Poland. A railway used to deliver aid to Ukraine has been blown up. A village in Romania was evacuated due to a Russian attack. 100 state-of-the-art fighter jets for Ukraine and its air defense. Zelensky and Macron have signed a historic agreement. Trump has prepared a new blow to Putin in the form of sanctions. There is panic in the Kremlin. Russian flags in Kupyansk and a hellish battle in Pokrovsk. The Flamingo missile, which is intended personally for Putin, has been painted pink. A retaliatory blackout. All of Donetsk and part of the occupied Donbas are without power. The date for the resumption of the Istanbul negotiations has been announced. Ukraine is launching massive strikes against the enemy's military-industrial complex. Which factories have shut down for good? All this will be covered in just a few seconds, but right now, please like this video. And subscribe to our channel, Ukraine Today, so you don't get lost on YouTube. Well then, let's get started. In Poland, the railway line used to deliver aid to Ukraine was blown up. We're talking about a section of the Warsaw-Lublin Railway, specifically near the village of Mika. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk stated at the scene that this was an act of sabotage.
The explosion on the Warsaw-Lublin railway line is an unprecedented act of sabotage aimed directly at the security of the Polish state and its citizens. This route is also critically important for delivering humanitarian aid to Ukraine. We will catch those responsible, whoever they may be.
Well, you don't have to look far to find who's to blame. It's obvious that the sabotage is the work of Russia, as stated by the head of the Center for Countering Disinformation of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Andriy Kovalenko.
The explosion on the railway in Poland is a typical act of sabotage. In Russia, this is overseen by Military Unit 29155 of the Main Directorate of the General Staff of the Russian Federation. This is a sabotage unit of the Russian military responsible for carrying out operations abroad. NATO countries are one of the main targets, especially anything related to aid for Ukraine or strengthening the defense capabilities of alliance countries. Various arson attacks in Germany, Poland, and other countries are the work of Russians disguised as different kinds of incidents. Typical acts of sabotage.
Polish Special Services and the prosecutor's office are working at the site where the railway was damaged. According to Tusk, damage was also discovered on the same route, closer to Lublin. In Romania, an entire village was evacuated due to a nighttime Russian attack on the Odessa region. This was reported by Euronews. According to the publication, the Russians attacked energy and port infrastructure in several cities of the Odessa region. As a result of the shelling, several ships were damaged. In particular, a Turkish vessel caught fire while it was docked near the port of Izmail. The vessel was carrying about 4,000 tons of liquefied gas. A fire broke out. Due to the risk of explosion in the Romanian village of Plour, Tulcea County, an evacuation of local residents was initiated. According to Romanian authorities, 15 people have already been evacuated to the settlement of Citalcoi. Local emergency service officials and the county prefect are working at the scene. Further response scenarios are being assessed. Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many of our viewers are from Kazakhstan, Moldova, Europe, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are very grateful to you for your support and proud to have such reasonable viewers. Let us know in the comments under this episode as well where you are watching us from and whether people in your country support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments. And now let's move on to the most interesting part. And now, to the news from the front. And unfortunately, the situation there has only been getting worse for a long time now. Pokrovsk has effectively fallen under the onslaught of the Russians. It is surrounded on 3 sides and Ukraine is suffering heavy losses. This shocking report comes from the Sunday Times. The situation was described in more detail by Bild's military observer, Erupt. He writes that Ukraine is approaching a strategic defeat in the war with Russia.
In the past month, Russia has captured territory in Ukraine the size of Berlin, about 900 square kilometers.
He also draws discouraging conclusions regarding weaponry and personnel.
Deliveries of Western armored vehicles are pointless against the backdrop of Russia's growing dominance in fiber optic and other unmanned systems. The whereabouts of the supposedly 17,000 people being mobilized each month remains a mystery to most observers and soldiers on the front line. Desertion and temporary absence from duty often leads to entire brigades existing only on paper.
Rybky also notes that if the government in Ukraine or its Western partners do not immediately change their strategic position, Russia will gradually win this war. Our military is also reporting that the enemy is advancing in the Pokrovsk area.
Groups of 3 to 5 people are trying to bypass Pokrovsk and penetrate the northern rear in attempts to break through to Rovno. Drone operators are tracking such movements. 2 groups were destroyed in the past 24 hours. The enemy is searching for our pilots and other crews.
The enemy has also advanced in Vladimirovka and near Sofievka. At the same time, however, the Russians are actively trying to imitate the capture of Kupyansk, waving flags in areas where small groups are present. This was reported by the Joint Forces grouping. The occupiers are also dropping flags to their units from drones to create the desired image. But most of Kupyansk still remains under the control of the defense forces. And despite everything, our forces are managing to resist the enemy. The defense forces have pushed the enemy back near Shakove. This is confirmed by deep state data. But that's not all. Russia has introduced wholesale drones that can fly not just 10 to 25 kilometers, but as far as 50. They have already been spotted in Pokrovsk. And this is a direct threat to logistics and our soldiers. This was reported to Business Insider by the Minister of Digital Transformation, Mikhailo Fedorov.
Spools with long, thin cables provide a stable connection to the pilot, making them virtually immune to electronic warfare and, as a result, more dangerous in combat conditions. Fiber optic drones have shown us that drones immune to electronic warfare really do pose a serious threat to logistics and personnel.
According to Fedorov, Ukraine is testing technologies to counter such drones. Among the methods are direct strikes, setting up ambushes, and attempts to cut the cables that keep the drone in flight. In some areas, supply routes have been covered with netting. And now here is our update on what is happening at the front and around it at this very moment.
Pokrovsk is on the brink. It seems that soon the Ukrainian armed forces may have to retreat and abandon the ruined city. Such grim forecasts are being made more and more often by Western military analysts. The Ukrainian command also acknowledges the full complexity of the situation on this section of the front. However, for now, there is no talk of surrendering the city. Our fighters continue to methodically drive out the occupiers entrenched in residential buildings. There, the enemy is desperately trying to set up strong points.
The situation in the city itself is difficult. There are ongoing shifting battles, and accordingly, we are clearing out individual houses and specific streets. In certain situations, the enemy, especially special forces, manages to infiltrate specific areas, set up ambushes, and as a result, tries to adjust their fire, both with drones and artillery targeting our positions. But now we have already learned the enemy's tactics in the city, so we are localizing all these points.
The fighting inside the city is for every block, every house, and even individual entrances. Neither side has full control over Pokrovsk. Nevertheless, the Russian army is disregarding its losses and is desperately trying to storm the Ukrainian city.
They repeatedly tried to enter from the north, but we reinforced our positions there, and there were also strikes from the flanks. They tried to activate several directions from the south, using both sabotage groups and even moving armored vehicles. We carried out counter-terrorist operations against the groups and struck the equipment with our firepower.
The losses suffered by the occupiers near Pokrovsk are so enormous that Russian contract soldiers are massively refusing to participate in local assaults and are simply fleeing their positions. The Russians no longer retrieve their wounded and dead from the streets, and their evacuation teams are being reassigned to assault roles. This state of affairs does nothing to boost the occupiers' courage. According to our partisans, the latter are almost leaving in entire groups without permission, deliberately destroying their own equipment beforehand.
Agents report the disappearance or desertion of several of their fellow servicemen after a series of targeted strikes by Ukrainian defense forces on Russian troop positions on the outskirts of Pokrovsk. Command posts, equipment parking areas, and UAV units were hit. Some Russian servicemen connect the desertion of Russian servicemen and the strikes on Russian armed forces positions with each other. Some believe that these servicemen were directly involved in this.
Those few desperate ones who foolishly decide to stay at their positions near Pokrovsk face a slow and agonizing death by starvation. And all this is because the defense forces have completely cut off the main logistics route for delivering supplies and ammunition to the occupiers. At least 2 airstrikes were carried out on the road that the Russians had managed to use to bring some light equipment into the city, after which the enemy was left without a supply route. Now the occupiers can only reach their positions on foot, and even then, only a handful managed to do so thanks to the heavy fire from the Ukrainian armed forces. Recently, Russian soldiers have resorted to all sorts of tricks just to avoid being spotted by Ukrainian drones. One of the Kremlin's latest so-called unparalleled inventions is this kind of armor. Our defenders have already nicknamed them tin cans. They don't make the occupiers any less visible, but they do get opened up by FPV drones just like real cans. No matter what corner the occupier tries to hide in, our drone operators will fish him out from there too. A vivid example of this is right now on your screens. A concrete pipe and a haystack, which the Russian soldier used for cover, did not save the occupier. Credit must be given to the Ukrainian pilots each time they manage to infiltrate even the most heavily fortified enemy positions and precisely strike enemy equipment. It's gotten to the point where our FPV drones are flying right into Russian shelters. When an FPV drone flies into a dugout or an ammo depot, the occupiers simply have no chance of survival. And the best proof of this is the latest statistics from the armed forces of Ukraine. In the past 24 hours alone, the aggressor country's army has lost about 1,000 soldiers. The total losses of the occupiers since the start of the full-scale war have surpassed 1,158,000 people. The AFU has already destroyed 11,350 Kremlin tanks, more than 23,500 armored combat vehicles, nearly 35,000 artillery systems, and 1,541 MLRS.
I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They hold the front and stand against a vast horde that greatly outnumbers them. That's why I urge everyone to support the AFU. And if you don't have the means to do so financially, write them words of support in the comments. I know they're watching us. And now, on to your and my favorite segment. Last night, there were some serious explosions in Russia's Oryol. There, friendly drones attacked the CHP plant once again, not for the first time. Can't you see?
What's going on there? It's not clear. Is that smoke from somewhere?
And these are already shots from occupied Donetsk. This city and others under the occupiers' control in this area were left without power after a drone strike on a substation.
All of Donetsk is without power. And Makivka, Hordeyka too. There's no power anywhere. And
this is the moment our Bars jet drones are being launched. At night, they struck an oil refinery in the Samara region and the Rubicon drone warehouse. This was reported by the General Staff. And that's not all. In the Kursk region, good drones set fire to the Sinkom plant, which produces zinc and chemical materials for the occupiers' military equipment, ammunition, and electronics. Wishing you more fiery nights, neighbors. Give a like if you agree. Occupied Donetsk without water is, without exaggeration, a very serious problem for the region. And while the city's residents are forced to use plastic bags as toilets and collect rainwater, the occupational authorities, instead of addressing the humanitarian catastrophe, are planning to develop military tourism.
Idiotic.
The plans to introduce the concept of military tourism were announced by the Deputy Prime Minister of the DPR, Kirill Makarov. They decided to focus on this very important area for one simple reason. Supposedly, the Republic represents an association of sites of military glory.
Right now, the Republic is essentially an association of sites of military glory connected to the Donbas liberation operation of 1943 and the events of the Civil War in 2014. And the special military operation that began in 2022. These are key locations that could attract tourists. We have set up a large interdepartmental tourism headquarters, within which we are starting to work. A national project called Tourism and Hospitality is being implemented in the Republic.
It's just curious, what kind of tourists are we talking about if the occupiers can't even provide for the basic needs of the region's residents? Or will tourists be handed little bags at the entrance? For excrement? Ukraine will receive new air defense systems and aircraft from France. This was agreed upon in Paris by Ukrainian President Zelensky and his French counterpart Macron. The two leaders signed a historic agreement. We're talking about 100 Rafale fighter jets.
They are capable of performing a wide range of combat missions, from gaining air superiority and interception to striking ground and naval targets, conducting reconnaissance and providing nuclear deterrence.
Zelensky is currently on an official trip to European countries, so we hope these won't be the last good news from our partners. Meanwhile, the US is preparing sanctions against countries that do business with Russia. This was in fact announced by the American president himself, Donald Trump.
Republicans are introducing a bill that provides for very tough sanctions and so on against any country that does business with Russia. Donald Trump, President of the United States.
The bill would allow Trump to impose tariffs of up to 500% on imports from countries that purchase Russian energy resources. This, in fact, concerns major consumers of Russian energy resources, such as China and India. And Trump added that they might include Iran in this sanctions list. We have repeatedly reported on how the head of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, hands out government positions left and right to his relatives. We're talking about more than 95 relatives in key positions. But if you thought that Kadyrov was the only one who turned government service into a family business, you're mistaken. As the publication Proct found out, 76% of Russia's top government officials have relatives in power.
86% of Federation Council members, 84 State Duma deputies, 74% of security officials and judges, 69% of governors, and 61% of government officials have relatives in public service.
After studying the biographies of 1,000 government officials, the journalists from the project uncovered an entire dynasty of power. The largest, without a doubt, is the Kadyrov family. Guess who takes first place if you remove Kadyrov from this equation?
At this very moment, there are 25 dynasties in the country where at least 10 members of the same family are simultaneously working in government bodies. Here is a list of the largest dynasties that are not from the Caucasus. Yes, that's right. Topping this list is the family of the Russian president himself, Vladimir Putin.
We won't go into detail about each one. Today, we'll talk about families who make their fortunes at one of Russia's main cash cows, Gazprom. Of course, it's not 10 relatives per person here, but the statistics are still very telling. Every single member of Gazprom's board has managed to get their relatives into government service. All
14 members of Gazprom's board have relatives who either work or have worked in government service or in businesses connected to the state. The overwhelming majority of them, 12 board members, have relatives who, at various times, have worked within the structures of the gas company.
The record holder for the number of relatives currently working within Gazprom structures is Oleg Akshutin, deputy chairman of Gazprom's board. Working side by side with the head of the family are Akshutin's wife, daughter, son, and daughter-in-law. At various times, 5 members of the family of Gazprom's board chairman, Alexei Miller, have also held government positions. But the deputy chairman of Gazprom's board, Mikhail Putin, has the most relatives in government positions and state structures. He is a cousin of Vladimir Putin. 23 relatives of Mikhail Putin, not counting the president's uncle, have held or currently hold lucrative government positions. Peace talks between Russia and Ukraine are once again on the international agenda and making headlines in the world's media. The Turkish authorities have started talking about the need for such negotiations. Given Istanbul's exceptionally important role in the peace process and President Erdogan's considerable influence over the dictator Putin, such statements carry weight. They sound promising.
Recep Erdogan will once again bring Ukraine and Russia to the negotiating table. According to Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, negotiations between the warring sides are inevitable and the only location acceptable to both countries is Istanbul. I think this war is now going through its worst phase because both sides are focused on destroying transport and energy infrastructure. Now it has turned into a drone war. No one can move anywhere. Only those who disregard losses are making any advances. In addition, Vladimir Zelensky announced in his address his intention to resume the negotiation process with the Russians. We are working to initiate another round of negotiations so that there is at least some prospect of ending this war. We are also counting on the resumption of exchanges. There are many meetings, negotiations, and phone calls. Right now, all of this is for that purpose. The first positive step toward possible negotiations was the agreement brokered by Turkey and the UAE on a large-scale prisoner exchange. According to the Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, Rustem Umerov, this concerns the release of 1,200 Ukrainians. Donald Trump is also counting on a swift end to the war. The President of the United States believes that the sanctions imposed on Russian oil companies will motivate the aggressor to make concessions. Oil companies. I hope this will happen soon. There is enormous pressure being put on India because it is buying Russian oil, and thanks to this, they have money for the war. That's why I think this will end soon. During the negotiations in Istanbul in the spring and summer of 2025, Moscow did not change its previous unrealistic demands on Kyiv, including denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine.
They are well aware of our position and they have it in their possession. As I have already mentioned before, our position is clearly stated on paper and it is absolutely no secret to anyone. In fact, everything about our position has been made completely transparent and open, so there is nothing hidden or concealed. It was voiced by President Putin in June of 24 when he spoke at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Moscow's intentions can only be judged by its actions, and it has made it clear what it wants. It wants the rest of Donetsk region, and obviously Ukraine will not agree to this. Right now we see that Russia continues to carry out long-range strikes on Ukrainian territory, obviously aiming to destroy its energy system and, so to speak, demoralize the country. On the one hand, the Kremlin does not want to stop the fighting for negotiations. On the other hand, Russia is increasingly pressured by newly imposed sanctions against oil giants Lukoil and Rosneft, Ukrainian drone and missile strikes on refineries and ports, as well as Putin's reluctance to lose dialogue with Trump.
The Russians are now trying to somehow break up this diplomatic ice to shatter it in various ways. And let's say both formally through diplomacy and informally. Right now they are working through the G7. Through communication channels, they have most likely tried to resume once again the Istanbul negotiation process. But in any case, the Russians are not ready to accept Trump's ultimatum. And Trump's ultimatum is very simple. Any political negotiations will only begin when the fighting stops.
At the same time, in reality, specifically on the battlefield, the Russian occupiers are only increasing the intensity and scale of their assault operations. They continue to advance in the Donbas and Zaporizhzhia directions.
The armed forces of Ukraine managed to destroy key components of the aggressor country's air defense system in Novorossiysk. We will talk about this and other highly effective airstrikes on Russia's military and fuel infrastructure, and how these successful attacks are undermining the combat capability of Putin's army.
They burned out, first of all, at least 4, and secondly, they also eliminated 2 radars. And that's not counting the fact that a dozen such installations may have been damaged.
New details, new conclusions. It turns out that the strike on Novorossiysk on the night of November 14th not only marked the collapse of Russian oil supplies, but also became the most powerful blow to Russia's air defense systems during the entire war.
Ukraine carried out one of the most devastating strikes against Russian air defenses. It destroyed 4 S-400 launchers at once, as well as 2 radar stations belonging to this battery.
Ukrainian media reported this yesterday, citing sources in the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU. It became known that 4 S-400 Triumph launchers were completely destroyed. They were located on the territory of the military unit of the Kuban Red Banner Regiment. In total, there were 12 such launchers at the site. The security service believes that some of the others were also partially hit. As a result, the entire division has been put out of action.
If anything is overlooked in this regard, then when these launchers need to operate, an emergency situation could occur, which could again lead to the detonation of the launcher or cause the missile to fly off course. In short, to summarize, there could potentially be a wide variety of different consequences or outcomes in this particular case if some seemingly minor or insignificant issue or detail is overlooked or missed. So, basically at this point in time, the entire base can essentially be written off as a total loss.
At the same time, 2 expensive locators from these long-range air threat detection systems were destroyed, as well as the targeting radar, which was actually guiding those very S-400. At the same time, even multi-million-dollar losses are not the main issue here. What's more important is that right now the Russians simply have nothing to replace the lost equipment with.
Well, while it's still somehow possible to replace the launchers, replacing the radars is extremely difficult, as you know. because each radar is a high-tech instrument, and under sanctions it's very hard, time-consuming and expensive to assemble one. Here there were two radars at once, and both were performing their functions as part of a specific battery. In other words, the battery has fallen apart. Now it needs to find a new radar, essentially its eyes, without which air defense is rendered useless.
What our defense forces used to strike Novorossiysk still remains unclear. It is likely that the SBU was operating drones. However, several Ukrainian special services were involved in the attack at once. So analysts agree that the strike was a combined one. You just need to make a wish at night. Maybe that was the wish for Novorossiysk. You see, wishes have a way of coming true. So that's the kind of menu offered by the defense forces. It's always a pleasure. But seriously, if we're talking about the systematic nature of such strikes, it's so systematic that they hit 2 or 3 times. It should also be noted that the destruction of military equipment and port infrastructure in Novorossiysk is just the culmination of the entire operation, which was carefully prepared and along the way destroyed many other Russian targets.
To reach Novorossiysk itself, they first had to strike Crimea. Literally the day before, there were strikes on Feodosia and at the same time on the Feodosia oil depot. The Kurovsky airfield near Feodosia was also hit, as well as the Feodosia Air Defense District, which allowed our missile operators and drone pilots to reach Novorossiysk. This is a very high-value target.
At the same time, the same sources in the SBU add that for now, an entire air defense division in Novorossiysk has been put out of action. There is a huge gap in Russian defenses which will undoubtedly be exploited by Ukrainian drones and missiles.
Czech engineers from Faypoint have created a symbolic ballistic missile to support Ukraine. The engineers painted a pink flamingo and the inscription Dana 1 on the body of the Flamingo cruise missile. The missile itself was purchased with funds raised by the Gift for Putin initiative. The total amount came to about $500,000. They managed to raise the money for the missile in It takes just 2 days, which is a very short period of time. In only 48 hours, something can be completed quickly and efficiently. The process is brief, and before you realize it, those 2 days will have already passed.